All right. Hey, everybody. Sorry for the little delay, but hey, we're here. And just a couple quick announcements first before we get started. Veterans Insurance Network is in the middle of their second annual Christmas card for veterans in cooperation with the Cleveland Cavaliers Cavs Care Team. These cards will be going to veterans that are in the hospital over the holidays. And we had a good showing of people donating Christmas cards with positive messages for veterans in them. And we would like to expand this next year to include other states. So if you think you can help us with this, email us at support@veteransinsurance.org. Let us know that you want to get involved, and we'll help you get set up and tell you exactly what needs to happen, and we'll go from there on that. And there's Mandy, and we're going to get, as soon as I find it, there it is. We're going to play this quick little video real quick, Mandy, and then we're going to come right back to you.
Perfect.
Now we're losing everything here. There we go. Let's get that off this. Everything's messing up today. must be the Wednesday. Must be the Wednesday close to Christmas. That's got to be it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody, welcome back to our show. Mandy Feindt, Army Major who was stationed out at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam, and was affected by the Red Hill fuel leak, and is leading the charge to help get those people the health care that they so rightfully need. And welcome back, Mandy.
Thank you. It is good to be back. How long has it been? A couple months?
Yeah, at least 3 months, yes.
Man, so much has happened in 3 months.
Exactly. That's why I asked you to come back on. I hear there's some good news going on.
There's a lot of news just in general, but yeah, some steps in the right direction, which is super exciting, and long ways to go, but yeah, we're well on our way.
So we can kind of get people caught up here, or if they're viewing for the first time, exactly what happened at Red Hill.
Yeah, so 2021, like you said, Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam. There was this asset. It used to be a classified asset, but essentially an underground bulk fuel storage facility that was built in the 1940s. So, well over 80 years ago at this point, underground bulk storage facility. It's had a history of leaking for many, many years. But in 2021, there was a massive spill. In May of 2021, we had no idea. The military failed to warn us about that. Folks started getting sick around, the summertime. And then in November of 2021, just before Christmas, November 20th, 20,000 gallons of fuel leaked from, this facility, compromised the clean water aquifer and compromised the drinking water. And so it impacted 93,000 people on the Navy's drinking water system. So, and just to be clear, not just military families, civilian families as well. And so, yeah, it's been a nightmare. And so, this week, it's ironic that we're doing this podcast update this week, because this was around the time that people's lives were changed forever 2 years ago. This week is also, the Army Navy game, the big hype. Everyone's buzzing about it, on social media, as we do every year. And I remember 2 years ago around this time, it was the 10th of December is when the Army Navy game was 2 years ago. And I was at the Army Navy game, like a watch party on my street. I was an Army girl. We were an Army family living on a Navy base. So obviously we're a little outnumbered at this party, but I remember my husband, who's a huge football fan, had to leave early, like within the first quarter, because he was just so sick. And our son, who was just 1 year old at the time, same thing. They just got super sick, and that's the day that we ended up for the first time in hospital on December 10th. So, yeah, we're right in the thick of it at that 2 year mark. But um, when I say it's been a nightmare, I mean, obviously, we've had certainly the medical issues. We've grown into this community of folks who have had that the medical issues have sustained. And so we've not only taken on our own families' issues, but, we have joined forces, if you will, with an entire community of military and civilian families whose children and spouses have been, impacted as well. And so that's certainly a heavy burden to carry when you're,
Yes.
in the middle of advocacy and things like that. And then, you did mention, I just want to say I am here in my civilian capacity. I have to say that, probably my commander's watching this, but, you did mention I am in the service, right? And so that's also been an interesting dynamic of still being active duty, advocating for this, being a mom first in all of this, and still donning the uniform and serving the organization that was responsible for poisoning my children. And then I guess the other like big piece of this is not only did the incident happen, right?
Mhm.
We were denied a basic human right, access to clean water, but we were also denied medical care, adequate medical testing. And it's just really been a mirror image for your viewers of what happened at Camp Lejeune. It's unfortunate history has repeated itself here. So that kind of catches you up to speed. It's been a lot, but that's
Yes.
the gist of
Yeah.
it.
And correct me if I'm wrong. When they finally decided that they needed to send some specialists for the medical issues, they pretty much sent like 2 physician assistants to to man a small little clinic for 90,000 people.
Yeah, so the initial response was at Tripler Army Medical Center, TMC, which is like a huge, you know, military facility. And they set up white tents kind of everywhere in different neighborhoods. And all they did is they had like a blank sheet of paper, and they like filled out your symptoms. They weren't really treating you. They said, hey, this stuff is in and out of your body. We begged for testing. This is initially on 2 years ago when it happened. And we were denied like any test. I was like, hair, skin, nails, do whatever you like. I'm the parent. I'm telling you, you can do it. I want to know what's in my kids' bodies. We were denied that initial testing, and denied any medical care. It really was this notion of it's in and out of your body, and these symptoms clearly are manifesting from just your stress over it, and there's nothing wrong here, and there's no indication that there will be anything wrong. So fast forward, a bunch of folks were like, hey, absolutely not. We are still so sick and no one's helping us. And we made certainly a lot of fuss and had folks in the community, the toxic exposure community, you and burn
Mhm.
pits and folks like that being part of that, who really rallied for us and made a lot of noise. And Congress finally just said, part of the NDA the following years, like, you need to help these people. And so they, being the Department of Defense or the Navy, developed this Red Hill clinic. And it was like, Tim, it was so hokey. It wasn't like a newly established clinic. It was a clinic that was already there on base. It was a clinic that only applied for military families who had TRICARE Prime. So if you had changed
Mhm.
your insurance to go to TRICARE Select, so you could be, seen off base and not around military doctors, you were screwed, right? So then you couldn't go see there. A lot of us who had gotten compassionate reassignment or went to the HUMS process to move off island, we didn't have access to this clinic. And more importantly, the civilians, the folks who lived off base, or DoD civilians, or members of the community that worked at a business that was on the Navy drinking water system, they didn't have access to this clinic. And the folks who were in charge of this clinic were the same doctors from TAMC, Triple Army Medical Center, who 1 year prior were denying you medical care. And so it was so frustrating. It was just one of those check the block, kind of like dog and pony show. There was a lot of hype and a lot of media around it. But it really kind of fell on deaf ears for the community. And I'm not just saying that, like, you could look at the statistics of how many folks have actually gone to this facility, as much as they've tried to push it and sell it. Folks just don't trust the people that are running it, based on the care that they've already received. And quite honestly, I don't blame them.
But there's been some things happening positive things have been happening. One, I saw on the news that they actually finally drained the fuel tanks.
So yes and no. Backstory. Again, I said this thing has been, in existence for 80 years. The Navy for a long time said this is like super valuable asset. We cannot get rid of it. It's safe. It's, it's just this, we have to have it, right? Well, then the 2021 spill happened and the Department of Defense, Secretary of Defense says, it's the right thing to do. We need to shut this thing down. And we have other ways to be able to fuel and be able to provide fuel to the Pacific. So we actually don't, it's like not that important to keep all this fuel here, which was like interesting, right? Because the narrative for decades had been like, we absolutely cannot shut this down. It's critical. However, it went from being this safe, critical, we must keep it asset to, okay, we're going to do fuel, but we have a gazillion repairs that we have to do so that we can safely do fuel. And you're not talking about like a couple thousand gallons of fuel. This is the largest underground bulk fuel storage facility in the world, of its kind. Over 100 million gallons of fuel reside in these tanks. And so that news came in, like, I believe March, sometime in the spring of 2022 from the Secretary of Defense. And we have waited, over a year and a half or whatever, for them to say, okay, now Red Hill is safe to defuel. So they have, and they came up with this big plan, and they overprojected how long it was going to take. And so about a month ago, they started actually defueling. So again, I want to recognize that is monumental. It's huge. Just like I echo what the Secretary of Defense said, it's the right thing to do, and it should have happened. And I'm happy that it has happened. So I want to start by saying that. However, it is not fully defueled, despite what the news is pushing. The bulk of the fuel that could have been gravity drained is out, and it's been sent elsewhere in the Pacific and stuff like that. But there is almost 1 million gallons or so that is still in there, and it's this sludge, it's the stuff that's most toxic that is still there. And there's not like a really solidified plan of how we're going to get that out. So the people of Hawaii and the folks who have been advocating for this are saying, enough of the narrative that it is defueled. Like, it is not yet defueled. And we can't celebrate a win first, because that stuff needs to get out before we can say that. And the most recent news within the past week is we've defueled early. We're 6 months ahead of schedule. And to that I say, and I echo the community's response, is that we're not 6 months ahead of schedule. We are decades behind the power curve, and we're not done yet. So I just think that's really important to know. However, I come back and I circle back and say, yes, it is being defueled, and it's important. It's the right thing to do. And it's currently happening.
Now, you said they still have sludge in some of those tanks, right? Close to 1 million gallons.
Yeah. Several thousand.
That stuff is highly explosive. And they haven't even mentioned a plan on getting rid of that yet.
They say it's the most dangerous. It's a very complex process of how they're going to do it. There's also part of the plan of actually how they're going to shut down the facility. The answer is no. And that process has not that's phase 2. It hasn't happened yet. And I believe that we should have a plan. It's being reviewed, up at Pentagon down the road. I moved, by the way. I'm in Northern Virginia now.
Oh, no, I did not know that.
Yeah. So I say down the road. So, all that stuff is being reviewed now. But no, I don't think that there is a solidified plan to get that stuff out just yet.
Now, how about the healthcare? Have they updated the clinic yet? Or have they even mentioned a plan on providing the proper healthcare and the testing needed?
The short answer is no. I don't even like to talk about the Red Hill Clinic, because it is just so.
Yeah, from what I've read from other people and people sending me comments, it's very depressing.
Yeah, the Red Hill Clinic, I would just count that out as it doesn't really, no one's utilizing it. I will say, speaking about wins, also over the past week, 2 things have happened. One, the Department of Veterans Affairs has now listed, and I'll send you the link, and that way when this goes out in the replay, we can
Mm-hmm.
show people where to click on. But the VA now has listed Red Hill, like they've updated their website to list Red Hill as one of those top three fuel exposures, most toxic fuel exposures, just under Camp Lejeune. So now it lists Camp Lejeune, Red Hill, and then K2, obviously downrange.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful that Red Hill is now highlighted. That tells me, that gives me an indication that that the VA is taking this seriously. We know that there has been congressional funding for a long-term health study. We are hoping that it doesn't take as long. I think that Burn Pits did a really wonderful job. We went from Agent Orange, then Camp Lejeune. I mean, all that stuff took so many years. When we talk about presumptive conditions and long-term health
Mm-hmm.
impacts and studies and research. And I think Burn Pits, was a long time before those presumptive conditions came through, and it truly took an active Congress. But I
Right.
think you all have paved the way as far as timeline, that we hope that with Red Hill, it won't take as long for the research to be applied, the money, and just the recognition, so that we can help our veterans sooner as far as medical care. So that is a huge win, and I'm very appreciative to the VA that Red Hill is being recognized as
Right.
being, they're taking it seriously. So that's positive. The other thing that is huge, and I have met so many amazing women, mama bears, military spouses in this. And so a good friend of mine, she has really been fighting with the CDC, ATSDR specifically, to have Red Hill listed on their huge A to Z list. And why that's important is because, when our service members a lot of them have issues with going to military doctors. Like, I refuse to have my children see military doctors again. And we're blessed in this situation where there's not a base close enough for them to go where we're here now. And then I did an exception to policy when I left Fort Carson in Colorado. But there are people who are paying extra money to go be seen off base. That's wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't have like that red tape of military leadership, military doctors sort of trying to cover this up or avoid testing because of litigation and all the stuff that comes into it. However, none of our civilian doctors knew what Red Hill was.
Right.
And so now doctors can go on that CDC ATSDR website and click on the A to Z list, and you can find Red Hill, which is huge, right? Because it validates that this is serious. It validates that the CDC is tracking it. And it gives doctors a resource to at least have some background on what Red Hill is. So, circling back to your original question, the medical care as far as military medical, I would say, just in my humble opinion, that no, that part hasn't gotten better, but our outside agencies, our sister agencies, are really coming through in that aspect, and we're making strides in the right direction.
Now, I know when I was advocating for the PACT Act, a lot of my fellow Desert Storm veterans didn't want to get involved because they wanted to fight for the acknowledgement of Desert Storm syndrome or Gulf War syndrome. And I'm like, but if this passes, you no longer have to prove anything.
Right.
And so when they finally says, yeah, okay, go ahead, we're going to support you on this, but they didn't want to get involved. But they kept telling me that when they would go into any medical facility, not just the VA, that doctors had no idea what burn pits were, had no, even VA doctors didn't know what burn pits were, didn't even know what Gulf War syndrome was or the symptoms for it. And I was just amazed. Here is an agency supposed to be taking care of us, denying us health care because they never heard of this before. And I can't even believe that military doctors didn't even know what Red Hill was.
Mm-mm.
I mean, that was plastered all over the news more than the PACT Act was at one time. I mean, it's I have to put blame on, and I'm going to come straight out and say it, the Department of Defense, because for a fact too that there's former and current military installations in this country that are so contaminated that they're on the EPA's Superfund listing. which means no human being should be living in
Joint
that
Base
area.
Pearl Harbor Hickam is like one of the top on the. It's like it makes the top 10. I'd have to
Yes.
look it up, but
Yeah.
was already a Superfund site, right? And so then you throw some jet fuel on it. Oh, by the way, thousands of gallons, and we've got government officials saying, "No big deal. We don't need to run any tests. This stuff is in and out of your body. You're going to be just fine."
Right.
Like it's acute symptoms, and I'm like, at what point do we stop calling it acute? We're 2 years in, and just in the past 6 months alone, I've been to I personally, not my family, 145 medical appointments. I mean, I wish I could show you, my medicine cabinet. I could run a pharmacy, as a family. Just it's absurd. Just
Yeah.
you know what that's called? It's called like medical gaslighting, is what it's called.
Yes. Sure is. Because little off subject here. There was a law recently passed called the PAWS Act, PAWS Act, to where the VA would help veterans, especially with PTSD, obtain service dogs. And passed, signed by the president. It's a law. VA puts it out on their website. I go to my mental health provider and say, hey, I'm interested in obtaining a service dog. I need you to put in the paperwork for it. She had no idea what I was talking about. So she went to her boss. Her boss calls me up and says, oh, that's a misprint, and hangs up on me.
Wow.
So the medical gaslighting is still going on by the VA, even after all the work that Burn Pits 360, DAV, Wounded Warriors, Grunt Style did to enlighten this country, not just the country, but the world, on what's going on here with veterans, that they're still gaslighting. It's mind-boggling. It really pisses me off. And I know it definitely gets you upset because, one, it's affecting the health of your children as well.
Yeah,
And your husband's gone through how many operations has he had? I mean, geez, oh, Pete.
A lot, yeah. So I think he's at 4 or 5 at this point. And then the amount of medical procedures where we've just had to be put under, especially like our kids at such a young age, to be put under anesthesia. And as a parent, that's just horrifying. Like praying that they wake back up, Yeah, it's. I have a friend. Her name is Belle, and she's in this. I think she was watching last time and commented. But she moved. Several of us have moved off island, whether it be just natural, permanent change of station progression, or because our families were so sick and we did get those compassionate reassignments. But she's out in California, and the first thing that she did, because she is a veteran of the Navy, she went to the VA, and they had no idea. Belle had to actually educate the VA there on what Red Hill was as soon as she got there. We've encouraged folks to do, like I do not like, especially live. Remember last time we were in the middle of a hailstorm? I don't necessarily like doing these, but I've never said no to an interview because I think it's important to spread awareness to our various communities. And it allows people to understand and know what the heck Red Hill is. And I've also encouraged folks to, when they do move, to try to reach out to their local hometown stories. And so I am from Virginia, so I'm so happy to be back, in this state. But, we did a news story with our local Hampton Roads, news channel, and they covered our family story. And then they reached out to the VA, and they wanted to know how many veterans in the Hampton Roads area, have come to you about Red Hill, or what can you tell us about Red Hill and Hampton Roads? So you're talking coast to coast, right? East Coast, West Coast. None of those, at least that's 2 examples, had no idea about what Red Hill was. And so again, that's where we're really grateful for these opportunities and for the networking and for, relationships and friendships like this one that have developed because, we really were truly and still are story. And it takes, a good group of veterans, excuse me, especially coming together and helping out, because I don't think that the VA would be tracking Red Hill if it weren't for some of those relationships that were established, for sure.
Right. And bravo on that CNN interview you did with Brianna Kellier and your lawyer.
Mhm.
She's married. I believe she's married to a Navy officer.
To
And the
her
comments I
staff,
saw on YouTube after watching you live, and then I went back to YouTube to read the comments that people were leaving, and you educated millions of people that day.
I wish you on here so I don't keep coughing in your podcast here. But yeah, I mean, it's opportunities like that that again are the most nerve-wracking experience ever, and not something that I certainly enjoy doing. But I think that it's important. And so I'm grateful for folks like Brianna, and you, and anyone who will allow us to their platform to share the story. I think it's critically important in times like this.
Yes.
Um, I'm very sorry. We're not getting that support from the military. We are constantly combating the military narrative, and I understand that we certainly want to celebrate wins, but when we do that, we as a military organization, you know, we really minimize the human factor and how many folks are still struggling. That part is never mentioned. And so
Right.
what happens is there's this sense of like feeling betrayed and left behind. And so that's just really unfortunate. And that's why we keep talking about it, you know.
Now, I know one of the posts that your organization and others were doing was the naval commander in charge of Red Hill at the time of the massive leak swept it under the rug, but then was nominated for a promotion.
He was nominated by the Secretary of Defense to be the chief of
Yes.
naval operations, like the most senior Navy position that exists, I guess, besides, you know, the Secretary of the Navy. Yes, he was.
And did he end up getting promoted?
He did not. In fact, the
Thank
first
God.
female has now assumed that position. So
Good.
that was a win for the people of Hawaii for sure.
Yes. I think for this entire country, to be honest with you, because he needed to take responsibility for what happened. It was his watch, and he just swept it under the rug. Like,
well, Tim, I'm trying to celebrate small wins here. So he did not
yes.
advance to that position. However, he is still in command of Pacific Fleet in Hawaii. And he'll probably remain in that position because he is pending a nomination to take over Indo-PACOM. So obviously there's some things which is preventing some of those pretty significant moves. Combatant command, one of them.
Yeah, matter of fact, his is still held up.
Yes.
But it wasn't because Tuberville. It was somebody else, I think, is holding his up. Now, the word is definitely reaching people that aren't even in the military. And if they want to help you folks, is there a website or anything where they can go to get more information to see how they can help you folks out?
Yes. Since the last time that we talked, the EPA required the Navy to sign this, you know, consent order essentially, and part of some of the things that the Navy had to consent to. So it's this consent order that has the EPA on it, the Defense Logistics Agency. Those are the three signature authorities. So one of those stipulations before defueling and part of this defueling plan is that there is a community representative group board, if you will. So folks were nominated to sit on that board. And we sort of represent different parts of the community. So there are two of us, me, one, and my counterpart, Navy veteran, impact interest, civilians that were, you know, drinking water on the water line, and various groups, Sierra Club being one of them. We have, several different social media outputs now. It's something that just got developed. And so when we send out the replay, I'd like to be able to provide that to you folks as well to keep up on the things that we are doing, the information that we're putting out, needing help with. We're still talking about like water distribution for families. We're still fighting with the Navy on basic remediation of the homes. So I sent you an article, and I think we should include that as well. But we're 2 years in, and the water has been flushed 1 million times over. And they are doing, as part of the consent order with the Hawaii Department of Health and the EPA, they are doing water testing. I think last time I checked, it was a little over 7,000 tests, which seems like a lot. But remember when I told you before that like 93,000 like homes were like impacted, or excuse me, 93,000 people were impacted by this. And so 7,000 sounds really great. But something that's important is that those water samples are only cold water samples. So let's peel the onion back a little bit on that. And I actually had a panel of, flag officers sitting on a panel, and I asked them this. I said, how many of you gentlemen, just quick raise of hand, how many of you shower in cold water or bathing your kids in cold water? And, it's just like no-brainer stuff like that. If you don't shower in cold water and all these folks are still getting rashes after showering, why aren't you testing the hot water? Why aren't you remediating the homes, the porous pipes potentially, or start with the water heaters? When you're only testing the cold water, you are completely bypassing the corroded, contaminated hot water heaters. And the Navy refuses to test as part of their water monitoring. They refuse to test hot water. And they keep calling it absolutely safe. So those are the kind of like things that we are fighting. Another one is sort of leading the charge on is working with the Hawaii Department of Health to manage to lower the environmental action levels. Because right now the Navy keeps saying, well, the water is absolutely safe, because the water that you're testing is potentially under the current established environmental action levels. But clearly, Tim, and you've seen them because I post them and our social media sites post them, but clearly when people are showering and there's getting these rashes, or when they're showing you the water that's coming out of their, faucet and it still has a sheen on it, environmental action levels are not low enough. You know what I mean? Like, again, I'm talking like, let's just apply at a minimum some common sense, right? And so we're still there. We are still in this purgatory, if you will. We are still just fighting for basic remediation. Again, the big level stuff, the defueling, like at the Department of Defense level, that is huge, right? And the fact that that's happening, we can celebrate that. Again, we're not there yet, but we are actively doing that, and that's huge. But I care a lot about the environment, and certainly the people of Hawaii do, right? Because they will live there far after we leave and far after the military's leases are, they're up for expiration here in a couple of years, and it'll be interesting to see if they get renewed. But the human factor, you know what I mean? Like, people still have to live in these homes. They can't afford to live anywhere else, especially our most junior grades. And we're still fighting for basic remediation, for environmental action levels to be lowered and for years to be replaced, or at a minimum to be tested. You know what I mean? And so because of that, we've got groups, and we're still accepting donations of just water distribution, because the military, and so they're not giving water out to people. So when you call the EOC, which is your emergency operations center, and you say, hey, I'm still getting these rashes, it's a little funny, I've got this like fuel, here's some pig call. They come out, they test your water. They don't offer you any water, right? They don't say, hey, until we get these tests back from the mainland, which could take 2 weeks, here's a couple of crates of water so that you can camp out in your home and shower with a water bottle and feed your babies, milk bottles, formula bottles up with clean water. They don't offer you that. because until they know, the water is considered absolutely safe. It's so backwards. And so what we have done as a community, what our walkers have done, what our Native Hawaiian groups who know in the history have no reason to want to support military families, they absolutely are. Those are the ones that are still, supplying water. Thing as far as like basic level stuff that we're fighting for. And I'm telling you, before I get out of the service, someone's going to get paid some hazardous duty pay, because it is like every time I go to Congress, people look at me like I have like 5 heads. And background, I'm a human resources officer. So like there's very few things that I can actually like control or have invested interest in when it comes to military, and pay is one of them, right? And so we have all of these incentive pays. We are trying our best to recruit. We're just throwing money at people to try to get them in the service, right? And I've said this before, when I was in the 82nd, my requirement was to jump out of airplanes once a quarter. I met that requirement, but I got paid $150 in hazardous duty pay every single month, right?
Yes.
When COVID happened, 2020, you are required to jump out of airplanes, and that's just one. There are several: divers, aviators, you name it, right? I'm just using that as an example. When COVID happened, folks weren't able to perform that duty. They weren't able to meet the minimum requirements to jump out of airplanes because we weren't operations at close quarters because of COVID, right? Understandable. But guess what? The Department of Defense granted an exception to policy, and all of those folks who were on jump status prior to COVID didn't have to meet the minimum requirements. They still got paid their $150 a month, and they weren't doing that hazardous duty, right? Who are actively in Red Hill tanks, who are most junior folks who are flushing contaminated homes without proper PPE, and anyone to pay them $150 a month. For one, it's principle, right? Because DoD regulations, the policy set, it's a special one when you handle toxic products. You get paid $150 a month. It's like A plus B equals C. It is so important. It's principle one because it's in the document. It's in the documentation, the policies. But 2, water delivery service in Hawaii for a family of 4 monthly is approximately $150 a month. And that's why it's so important to me. And people can keep looking at me like I have 5 heads, but it is like that, basic level stuff. That is the human factor that we are not talking about. That, the military is not selling that. Hey, we're just denying people hazardous duty pay that they're probably like deserve. We're just not testing the hot water heaters because we can. And those are the things we're still fighting for. I could go on and on about this. We've probably been at it for a while.
Yeah, that should have been a no-brainer. You're already paying the fuelies who handle fueling the planes and the boats every day, hazardous pay. These guys should be getting the same pay, flat out.
Yeah.
Now,
especially
one thing I did,
their area of expertise, right? I had HR guys like that were in my gym who were going to work like these flushing operations, right? They have a background, it was junior grade folks to flush homes with an iPad. They weren't subject matter experts. They were literally reading like line by line with no PPE. They came in with hard hats. And I'm like, what is that? Like, maybe because you have a mask or, something over your clothes so that when you went home, you don't expose your kids to, with that uniform that's just going to sit there. Yeah. The amount of common sense that has been applied here is just, or lack thereof, has been extremely frustrating.
Now, this whole issue is going to get some more media coverage here very soon, I do believe. Because are there 4? I can't even remember how many, but some military people are actually suing the government over this.
You might be looking at one of them.
That's what I thought. But yes. I cannot believe it has to come down to this.
It's awful, because then you're putting this like, I'm a huge patriot. I've been a walking billboard for the military. I love it. I've been making the Kool-Aid, drinking the Kool-Aid, selling the Kool-Aid for nearly 18 years. And it's just a really disheartening position to be in. But, for me, the active duty suit, certainly, the family lawsuit is huge, and that thing has just grown. I think there's about 7,000 folks who at this point, based off the statute of limitations, I think there's about 7,000 folks who are involved in that lawsuit, and rightfully so. But the active duty suit, I just think that it's important not only for this community, but I think it sort of paves the way for folks who will come after us, like in the future. Because I don't say like if I say when, right? Because unfortunately, this stuff has been happening, and I can't leave the military knowing that this is the way that we treat people, and this can't. Folks shouldn't have to fight this hard for like just basic stuff. And there are almost 1,000 active duty folks who have filed like pre-child litigation, like paperwork to go through with the actual lawsuit. But there are 5 of us who have actually filed. The lawsuit is called Whaley versus the United States, named after Colonel Whaley. She's a pediatrician at Tripler. And so it's her, me, there's an Army warrant officer, and then there are 2 Navy officers as well. And it's a challenge to the Ferris Doctrine, right? Which typically has protected the military allowing service members to file, and not be liable for the harm that has been caused to service members. And there are parts of me that, agree with that, right? Like when we raise our right hand, we know we volunteer for the inherent risk that comes with that. However, we weren't downrange when this happened, right? When something like this is sort of expected to happen. We weren't, doing this as part of our job. We weren't doing our job, without being too explicit. Like when we were home naked showering, or when I was, cooking spaghetti for my kids, or when I was bathing them or putting them down, saying their prayers at night or washing clothes. I wasn't on duty then. And the expectation is not just because you live on base that like the government has admitted liability for our families, and they should absolutely do the same for service members, that we should not be like excluded from that. And that I feel strongly about that. If this was a downrange situation, we'd be having a different conversation, but we'll see what happens. It'll ultimately probably go to the Supreme Court, and we'll be fighting it for several years, but it's worth it. It's worth it to me. And I think it's worth it to the folks who have signed on to this, and for the folks.
Oh, I'm supporting all of you that are doing this. It's highly important. And also too, when we raised our hand, we vowed to defend the Constitution and defend our country, not get poisoned by it. Because, as you know, our country poisoned me too, and then denied it. And it seems like with the emails that I'm getting from people, it's not just Red Hill. And you met some of the Air Force veterans from Nevada who are at the Nevada testing and training site, and how they can't even get VA health care because of where they were stationed at. And matter of fact, I'm having them on again next week too, because there's some updates with those guys. But one of the bases I was stationed, 2 bases I was stationed at, George Air Force Base, Blytheville Air Force Base, both closed. They're in the top 10 of the EPA's Superfund site. Then you got Edwards Air Force Base, which is still active, but you can't drink the water there because of the contamination in the water there.
Right.
Nellis Air Force Base, you can't drink the water there either because of contamination, but yet we're still sending people there. And the DOD saying, oh, everything's fine. But yet people are getting sick. And they're not just like the stomach flu sick. It's terminal cancers and stuff that they're getting. And and for the DOD to continue to deny this is keeping these people from getting the health care that they earned. Because some of the guys that I met when I went out to Las Vegas to meet with those guys, some of them lost their health care because they were getting too much, so their private insurance dropped them.
Wow.
I think that's kind of against the law now, but before, if you used your insurance too much, your insurance company could drop you. This happened to a lot of them, and so they're paying out of pocket. And I don't want to see this happening to your group of people, because a lot of you are still active, but yet the illnesses that some of these men and women are getting is going to end their career. And then they're going to go to the VA, and the VA, thank God, because I just saw that just yesterday too, that they put up Red Hill on their list and finally put it on their website. So now it's in black and white. But like Secretary McDonough told us when we were advocating for the PACT Act, he could go ahead and approve us getting health care today. But if anything were to happen to him, the next secretary could go ahead and take it away. So that's why he fought for the PACT Act, to make it a law. But since a lot of you are still active duty, you still have to follow the DOD rules and regulations, and they are letting you folks down. And I'm not just like, forget to send you a birthday card. They're taking your life away from you.
Yeah.
And it's getting me all up in the fields, because this should not be happening in this country. You got people fighting for this. You got people arguing about that. And then when it comes to veterans getting the health care, or military people getting the health care, all you hear from a lot of people is like, well, you raised your hand. Yeah, we did. But we didn't raise our hand for this.
Well, I think it's you did raise your hand, right? And like I said, we did know that there was inherent risk. But that's not where it ends. Just as we have an obligation, so does the military to us. The less than 1% who have dedicated our lives to serve our country. There's an obligation too from military medical, from the Department of Defense, and the VA, 1%. Medically, their well-being, their mental health, all of those things. You can't expect folks to go through this and to endure this, and then you add families into it, and then deny that those things happened, deny that they're service related, or deny them care. One thing that I've been fighting for too is not just with Red Hill, and I'm hoping the new DHA commander has finally agreed to meet with me, and I look forward to the opportunity of when I actually get to sit down with her, because I think it's really important, not just for Red Hill, and it is something that I'm using Red Hill because we're in it. We're in it right now. It's not something we're fighting from the past. It's time. But I believe that when situations like this happen, they've developed this new DOORS system. Don't have to look it up. But anyway, it's an exposure registry for service members, and there's supposed to be the ability to put families on it too. So we're putting these folks on a registry, but that is like an administrative check the block. That doesn't do anything for me or my family. No, what I'm fighting for, what I would like to see happen is that we develop event-oriented medical surveillance programs. In the same way that our aviators, for example, do annual exams, and we go sort of above and beyond them based on what they are exposed to, fuel being one. We should do those things. Maybe we could be proactive with people's health, so that maybe we could, people could have a few more years in their life and enjoy their family post-retirement after they've given it all to service to their country. Maybe we could allow them to enjoy a few more years because we've been proactive with their health. We put them in toxic situations. That is a known thing that when you come in, it is inherent risk. But you know what? We're going to take care of you. We owe you that. And so that's something that I'm really passionate about and something I would really like to see changed. Presumptive communications fighting for that so long, it probably wouldn't take so long if we were actually monitoring people. We could catch it early.
Right.
It's just something I'm really passionate about. It's something that, I got 2 more years in, so long as the military will keep me. That's something I'm, going to be working on.
Well, there's one. I'm glad you brought that up, because there's actually a young lady that I met in DC, and she was part of Burn Pits 360. And last name's Barbosa, and she wrote what's called the Barbosa Act. It's sponsored by I forget what senator. But what it is her husband was deployed, came back, started feeling a little sick, and they kind of blew it off. Then finally it just got so bad. I think they took him to a civilian doctor off base, and they found out he had stage 4 colon cancer.
Wow.
Then I got to talk to a young man before he passed away on the phone once. His name was Wesley Black. You might recognize the name. I know a lot of my viewers will recognize that name. He was an extremely huge supporter and advocate for Burn Pits 360 and the PACT Act. He passed away from stage 4 colon cancer. They're finding out that a lot of these young men and women coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq were getting colon cancer. But the DOD stance on that is nobody under the age of 45 will get a colonoscopy as long as they are still active duty. How many enlisted people do you know are still active duty at age 45? Not very many. So when they get out,
I don't know, Tim. I don't mean to make light of this situation, but like with the way that recruiting's going, we might have some 45-year-olds being allowed to come in at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, just might. Yeah, I agree with you. And they know why they know why enlistment is down, but they're not going to fix it.
So, yeah, it just doesn't make sense. It's common sense. When you put these folks in a situation, you've got a population of people who are getting this type of cancer. You screen for it. Everyone that gets back, you screen for it.
So the Barbosa Act is making it mandatory for the DOD to allow service members coming back off of deployment to get a colonoscopy within the first 2 years of coming back home.
Wow. That's
colon
amazing.
Cancer is the easiest to detect, the easiest to cure if you catch it soon enough. If you catch it soon enough, it's like 100% cure rate. If you don't catch it, or if you don't test for it, then it's too late. It spreads too quickly. So that's why the Barbosa Act, I wish it had gone to the floor already, but I don't know what the holdup is. I'm going to have to get... here's why I can only remember her last name, because she has the same first name as you. So it's Amanda Barbosa. Her husband was in the Army as well. So, and I think Wesley Black was in the Army. But here's another thing too. There are Gulf War veterans who received a letter from the DOD stating that they were exposed to sarin and or mustard gas during the Gulf War. Mm-hmm. Now the DOD is saying they never sent those letters out. I've got some of those letters in my possession, DOD. I also got other documents that are going to come out here very soon. But one thing that I'd like to see is veterans come together and say, hey, look, enough's enough.
Enough is enough.
Because you're doing one hell of a job getting active duty members to say enough is enough. It's time to take care of us before we get too sick. Why we're still active duty. Why it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to fix us. And I wish veterans would do the same thing. Not only for themselves, but for people like you, those at Red Hill, those at Edwards Air Force Base, Nellis Air Force Base. I think 29 Palms is even on that. super fun list. So, veterans, please, let's start getting together. Do it right. Do it the right way. You got, if you're going to call out congressmen and senators, do it the right way. Show the evidence. Show what it is. Don't no name calling. Don't get no violence. Nothing like that. Things can happen. Things can change. Things are changing there at Red Hill due to the way Mandy and her folks have been handling this, and it's time. The DOD needs to finally confess that, yeah, we knew for decades we were poisoning you all. And you have opened up a lot of eyes, not just in military, but in the civilian population as well. Because like I said, the comments I read on YouTube on that interview you did with Brianna Killier, God, those people were like unbelievable. That one, they're supporting your cause. Two, they hope nothing happens to you with your military career because of speaking out. And three, they're like what I just said. It's time for people to speak up and tell the DOD enough's enough.
Yeah. Thank you for saying all that. And you always say like, you're leading the charge. That makes me feel uncomfortable. Thank you for saying that, but it does make me feel uncomfortable because, and when we're speaking to veterans and we're speaking to the community and we're calling on folks, there are so many people in the Red Hill community, both military and civilians, who are fighting this thing. And I think that everyone has their own special talents. And I think that everyone has different gifts, from God. And he just gave me a mouth and he gave me a voice. And so I'm using, that. And I like networking and I like being a well-resourced person. And I've just been so grateful to link up. I mean, Burn Pits, 360 was my first foot in the door. And I'm just so grateful for the relationships that I've made through PACTAC and all that. But there are so many different ways that folks can fight this thing. Not everyone would feel comfortable doing something like this. I don't even feel comfortable doing it, but I do it, right? Because I'm just in it. But there are so many ways for folks to get involved, whether it is, just going to your local Congress, folks who do the casework in your own hometown, writing letters. I mean, I think it's important that maybe when we do the replay on this too, is we put a way for folks to write, the Secretary for the VA, the Department of Defense, our congressional leaders, the administration. Maybe writing is your talent, and that is a way to get involved. There are so many different ways, and us veterans, we make it 1% of the population, but we're everywhere, right? And so there's congressional leadership in all of our states, and so if getting out there and speaking out and waving signs is not your forte, or doing interviews, there are so many other ways to get involved in it, and it takes all of that to make a difference. And that's what's happened at Red Hill, is that we've sort of identified what folks' strengths and weaknesses are. And it has been truly a collective effort. And again, not only from our military community, but I can't say enough, and it chokes me up, about our Hawaiian community. And to know what, they've been through for decades, and to know the history on how the military came to be in Hawaii. And again, I said it before, and how those folks, especially like our Native Hawaiian families, have absolutely no reason to lend that olive branch, or, to be so generous and charitable to our families. And they absolutely have. And so it's, what I've learned in this is, just the community coming together makes the absolute biggest impact. And there's so many ways to do that.
Now, one thing I want people to know is each congressman, each senator has an email, but they only allow their constituents to email them. Each office has its own phone number. Anybody can call them, not just your elected official, but you can, if you live in Hawaii, you can call Schumer, you can call Nancy Pelosi, you can call this new guy, speaker, Mike, whatever his name is, you can call their office. You 9 times out of 10, you'll get somebody, and they will listen to you. And if you request a phone call back, they have to call you back. The days of Jim Jordan and, well, Portman's no longer in office, not returning phone calls and emails, and JD Vance, listen up, buddy. You need to start listening and emailing your constituents again. Those days are over. It's time that the veteran community, military community, start speaking up for themselves and making these people responsible. Hold them responsible. They're the people we put into office to work for us. It's time we make them work for us. It's time they earn their paychecks. And Mandy, it's a pleasure having you on again. If you can stay on for a few minutes after we go off the air, because something tells me here a few more months down the road, we're probably going to have you on again with some more good news, I think. Because the way things are going right now, it seems like, even though it's moving slowly, but a little bit here, a little bit there, some positive movement. So hopefully we shows like this can get that moving a little bit faster for you folks and get you the care that you all need. All right, people.
Yeah.
Next week, like I mentioned, we're going to have the Air Force veterans from Area 52, Nevada Testing and Training Site, and Tonopah Range on. That story, too, it's unbelievable. Since they were stationed out at a base where the DOD says doesn't exist, they cannot get health care through the VA. And those that can afford it got toxic testing done, and they're all sick with plutonium poisoning. So they're paying for their own health care out of pocket. So we'll see them next week. Then the week after that, I believe we are going to have the VFW Veterans Home on. So we'll talk about that nonprofit. And, why I still have you on the air. As you may know, I started Veterans Insurance Network. The network is growing. So if a veteran goes to a nonprofit in the network and they don't offer the services that they're looking for, either they call me up or they will have the database on who can get the services to that veteran, so that veteran doesn't feel like they're being pushed away, that somebody's actually going to take care of them. Because when I was in D.C., several larger nonprofits turned veterans away, saying we don't offer services to your generation, but become a member so you can help the ones that we do help. But they didn't offer them information on where they can go to get the services that they needed. And I thought that was wrong. So we're at about 175 nonprofits now, and it's growing every day, folks. So if you don't know who to go to for services that you need, give us a call. We know who. We'll get you there. Matter of fact, we've helped in the last 3 months, we've helped 75 veterans, and the follow-ups are, they couldn't believe that we follow up with them. So we just don't leave them hanging at the door like, hey, this is who you go to. No, we get in contact with the people that offer them the services, and then we follow up the veteran to make sure that it's working out for them. And we're hoping to start supplying oxygen concentrators here in January. As you notice, I don't have the oxygen on today.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been doing pretty good lately. There's other things going on, but the oxygen's been staying pretty steady lately. So thank God for that. Yep, if you can stay on just for a moment. All right, people, we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Tim.
You're very welcome.